Welcome back, friends, to another weekly video. This week we saw another protest outside the home of Jeff Bezos, where the protesters built a guillotine. We have seen these protests now outside of his home in New York, Washington, D.C., and now Beverly Hills, each with around 100 people. Now, something big is going on here that all business people should be paying attention to, so I'm going to be breaking it all down for you in this video. Just a quick reminder, we now have merch. You can click the link in the description box below. This is a great way to support the channel, and just a reminder that Christmas is coming and these make great gifts. So who is Jeff Bezos and why are people protesting? Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world with a net worth of $113 billion. He is the founder of Amazon, starting the company from his garage in 1994 and building it to become the massive corporation today. Amazon has faced a lot of criticism during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amazon never really shut down because so much of the country relied on Amazon's deliveries. Now, a lot of employees were upset by working in unsafe environments, and a number of Amazon employees walked out of a shipping facility in Staten Island, led by a man named Chris Smalls. They were protesting unsafe work conditions. Amazon immediately fired Chris Smalls. What is troubling to people here is that Amazon is firing these employees while the company is making record profits during the pandemic. Since being fired, Chris Smalls has been leading these protests outside the various mansions of Jeff Bezos around the country, and at each protest, they are building a guillotine. The guillotine is a very specific message referencing the French Revolution. Now, I don't think a lot of people really understand the subtext of what is going on here. The French Revolution was a period of time when poor people rose up against the rich and said, "Off with their heads." The guillotine seems pretty gruesome to us today, but it was actually considered one of the less painful forms of execution because it was so quick. France used guillotines to execute people until 1977, which was the last time a Western nation beheaded someone. To understand what the protesters are saying, we have to know a little bit about the French Revolution. In 1793, France executed the French King Louis XVI and established a democracy. This was part of a social movement away from monarchies and towards democracy. In fact, this happened shortly after the United States declared independence from England in 1776. The switch to democracy was a huge change for France. Before the revolution, France still operated under a feudal system where peasants belonged to vast estates. French society was structured into three classes of people. Under the king was the clergy, who managed the churches and owned 10% of the land. Then came the nobility, who owned 25% of the land. And finally the common people, which represented 95% of the population. The clergy and the nobility were very rich, and the common people were very poor. This all happened around 300 years after the Renaissance, and the Renaissance is when small businesses and trade across Europe made it possible for normal people to create wealth. But the feudal system was holding people down. Peasants do not have rights. Peasants cannot vote, and this caused a lot of frustration. Most history professors will explain that the driving force behind the French Revolution was this desire for democracy and the desire to vote. But I disagree with this interpretation. The French Revolution was about money. I know I'm going to get a lot of angry comments from history professors in the comment section, but in my opinion, it was about the money. Let's look at the financial situation in France. There was an unfair tax system. The tax structure was regressive, which meant the more money you had, the less you paid in taxes. In the US, we have a progressive tax system where the tax rate actually increases with your income. So in France, the clergy and the nobility paid little or no taxes, and the poor people paid all the taxes. France was nearing bankruptcy. The company was quickly running out of money, and no one wanted to extend them new debt. France had a massive budget deficit. The budget went from 10% of gross national product in 1789 to 64% in 1793. They were spending more money than the government was bringing in. To fix this situation, they tried two things. They increased taxes on poor people, and they had massive printing of money. This led to economic depression and massive unemployment and massive inflation, upwards of 3,500%. This inflation was incentivized because there was a massive amount of debt holders. This incentivized inflation because the diminished value of the currency diminished people's debts. This was all made worse by a huge famine in France, which led to high food prices, leading to mass starvation. All these things drove the revolution. It was not simply that people wanted to vote, it was economic. People were starving, and their leaders were screwing up the country. They were angry, and they wanted a voice. When we look at this list today in hindsight, many of these things seem almost silly. Clearly, King Louis XVI was not an accountant, because many of these financial problems could have been prevented. Why did the king allow the rich people to pay 0% taxes? Why didn't he just tax them? Why didn't he just cut the government's budget? Why did he print so much money? For whatever reason, the result was economic collapse. What is unique about the French Revolution is how violent it was. This period was called the Reign of Terror. The new government formed what was called the Committee of Public Safety. This committee executed people it identified were against the cause of the revolution. 16,500 people were executed by guillotine, out of as many of 40,000 executions either by firing squad, drowning, or being beaten to death. Most of these happened without a trial. So one of the questions for historians is, why was the revolution so bloodthirsty? Massive crowds gathered to watch executions by guillotine in the public squares. Why did they keep killing once the people had the right to vote? The Committee of Public Safety was established after King Louis XVI was already executed. So why did they have to kill 40,000 more people? In my opinion, the violence was driven by the money. People were poor, people were starving, and this sparked a flame of protest. Once the killing started, they could not stop. There's a simple reason why I say all of this. Rich people do not riot. There's no reason for them to. But if you look at your life and there's no opportunities for economic success, while the upper classes are doing fine, you're going to riot. Even if you have the right to vote, you're going to riot because there's no economic opportunities for you. A lot of academics try to explain why the Reign of Terror happened. I'll tell you the real reason why history professors explain the French Revolution as being driven by democracy. It's because it's very reassuring for the public. If the reason for all the killing was the right to vote, once democracy is established, there's no reason for the Reign of Terror to ever happen again. I think this is naive. It was not the vote, it was the money that sparked the fire of protest. And if that is the case, those same economic conditions can happen again. Now, just to be clear, no one wants the Reign of Terror to happen again. No one wants poor people to rise up and cut off the heads of 16,500 people. But this is a threat we should be taking seriously, and it is something we should be doing everything we can to prevent. Let's look at the list again of the causes of the French Revolution. All these things could happen in the United States. Just look at the tax system. The US says it is a progressive tax, meaning the wealthy pay more tax. But I keep hearing about rich people who pay almost nothing in tax. The US has a massive budget deficit. The US is massively printing money. Food prices are quickly rising. At some point, poor people, even though they have the right to vote, are going to feel like their leaders are not working for them, and the rich will need to be held accountable. So what can we do to prevent this? Most business owners will look at this information and think, there's nothing they can really do. This is all the economy, right? How can one person influence the outcome? I actually think there's a lot that each of us can do to prevent another reign of terror from happening. I think what it takes is leadership in the business community. When you learn about leadership, there's a common idea. When you take care of your people will take care of you. They talk about this especially for leaders in the armed forces. If you're commanding troops, you have to be willing to be in the trenches with them. If you run back to safety when the first shots are fired, they're not going to go the extra mile for you. So when we look at the question, what can we do? You can be a leader. The way that leadership plays out in the business world is through the everyday decisions that you make. When you're sitting at the top of a company, you're making 150 little decisions each and every day. In each of those decisions, are you thinking about the welfare of your people, or are you thinking about yourself? That is the difference that makes a leader. It is when you approach those 150 decisions with self-sacrifice instead of selfishness. Because I will tell you this, your people know who is looking out for them and who is not. And I will say it again, when you take care of your people will take care of you. When I look at the business world today, I see a huge lack of leadership. That is why we study ethics. When you look at the financial statements of a business, you cannot understand them unless you also take a step back and ask yourself the question, am I doing what is right? Unless you ask yourself that question, the numbers on the page are not going to make sense and will not lead you to the correct business decision. That is why ethics has always been a part of accounting, all the way back to the original accounting textbooks written by Luca Pacioli during the Renaissance. Luca Pacioli talked about reputation, honesty, and integrity as driving factors behind what makes financial markets work. Your business is not going to last unless you are doing what is right for your people. So let us bring this conversation back to Amazon and Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world. People are out in front of his house protesting and building a guillotine. This is why it's important that you learn about business history. This is the same spark and the same message that turned into the flame of the French Revolution. That flame turned into a wildfire that became 40,000 executions. I do not know why more people are not paying attention to this. If I was a rich person in America, I would be scared to death. So what do these protesters really want? You know, when I first saw this news story, honestly, I dismissed it. I just thought that these were crazy people with crazy demands. Why are we even listening to them? But when I started looking into it, they're actually not asking for very much. Their main demands include personal protective equipment to protect employees, paid sick leave for employees who test positive for COVID-19, hazard pay during the pandemic, compensation for COVID-19 deaths on the job, a $30 per hour minimum wage. Amazon currently pays $15 an hour, 1 hour lunch breaks, and free childcare and healthcare for full-time employees. When I first read this, I was shocked. I expected their request to be outrageous, but we are only talking about $30 an hour. The protesters are not asking for anything here that would be impossible for Amazon to implement. Let's take a step back here for a minute. We are all in a pandemic. We all rely on Amazon employees to make deliveries while everyone sits in their houses in quarantine. These employees are risking their lives, and they're saying that Amazon is an unsafe work environment. They're saying they do not even have basic personal protective equipment. These people are heroes. We should be treating them like heroes. This brings us to our question about leadership. Is Amazon taking care of their people here? This is also a time when Amazon is raking in the money, and Amazon is firing any employee that speaks out. No wonder people are protesting, but we need to take notice because this is not any normal protest. They are building guillotines. This is a spark that we do not want to turn into a flame. And yes, these are protesters that have the right to vote, but that is clearly not stopping this spark from happening. We should ask ourselves, Are these protesters looking at their lives and seeing that there are economic opportunities around them or not? Are they feeling that their government leaders are working for them or not? Now, we should note here that Amazon just picked their new corporate headquarters. Out of all the cities in the United States, do you know where they picked? Arlington, right next to Washington, D.C., the seat of political power. So here's the question. Are our political leaders working for Amazon or the poor people? Who is making money here? Amazon or the poor people? Jeff Bezos. If you're listening, I don't know if you have anyone around you who will be brutally honest, but I will. Just give the guy his $30 per hour so he can feed his family and so that he will stop building guillotines outside your house. Jeff Bezos, this is sparking a movement that none of us want. And unless you do something about it, these protests are going to continue and they're going to get bigger. There's one more interesting thing about the protesters here. At the end of their list of complaints, they make an interesting statement. They're going to lobby the US government and ask that the tax structure be restructured to raise taxes on the rich, just like what the poor people asked for during the French Revolution. Now, I'm not going to say that this approach to tax is right or wrong. It's a complicated issue. All I'm doing is I'm drawing parallels between what happened in the French Revolution to what is happening today, because I will tell you this, the protesters are certainly drawing that connection. Thank you so much for watching. If you have additional accounting questions, you can always email me through my website, wolvesandfinance.com, and I will reply with my rates. I'm Zach from Wolves in Finance. Let's go out and make some money.